Randy's guts. I think it's really interesting because when you talk about prestidigitation or stage magic, what would be considered trick magic, as opposed to thaumaturgy, which would be classified as real magic, making something out of nothing, as opposed to illusions using hidden technology, such as machines or various other types of props to create an effect. Anton LaVey said, if you saw someone walking on water, for instance, or raising the dead, and you couldn't tell the difference between whether it was a trick, prestidigitation, or thaumaturgy, real magic, what would be the difference? And I always thought that always really stuck with me, because I think sometimes you will get some of these experiments carried out in laboratories, which are the direct result of tampering with the experimental parameters to such a degree that you create a stage effect, and therefore some of the after effects, the outcomes can be considered questionable. So these are things you have to get in, you have to look at when you're talking about magic at this level.
Hitler would use such techniques of prestidigitation and the emotional response to his ceremonies.
Yeah, most definitively. I mean, I think that not only him, but you would see this used by probably the better Christian evangelicals, or perhaps some of the better psychological well-being and better car salesmen. People involved in Scientology. Anytime you can be able to cold read your audience, be able to take control of the situation in which they are surrounded by, and have the parameters defined by you, the end result can seem to be of a nature that some would consider to be perhaps angelic, divine, or miraculous, whatnot. So I have to think that has to be defined differently as real magic, which doesn't seek to be proven or disproven by exterior sources, because it's not about conversion. It's not about trying to make people believe this or not, because ultimately the true magician is alone, and therefore has to be their own darkest critic and deepest critic about what it is that they're trying to accomplish.
Well, now you as a satanic artist have a very good understanding on the deception of artwork and architecture, and the ideas of aesthetic terrorism, and the ideas of how these phi ratios and sacred geometries are being used by the world elites against us with this aesthetic terrorism.
Well, I think there's a lot of this type of thing being used in the creation of certain types of buildings, and some of us look upon that and we feel really energized by it, and I think it can create very dour effects on those who are unaware of it. This is one of the reasons that hauntings take place in certain types of buildings, whether they're multi-storied skyscrapers, or the somewhat smaller and diminutive mansard-roofed, creepy Munster-style houses that you might see in San Francisco or maybe on the East Coast. Shape and dimension definitively have effects on the viewers, and we know this. This is part of this just psychological magic. This is what in black magic we call, or in satanic magic we call, lesser magic. These are just psychological effects that affect the mind and the psyche of the viewer. It's not to be confused with high magic or night side magic, which takes place in the ritual chamber, which is of a different order, in which you suspend time and space to create an effect, and it's a lot more difficult to measure that type of effect.
Oh yeah, what kind of effects do we get from magic? I've always wondered about this. I've talked to some magicians about what type of effects they've gotten from their spells, and I really have been left kind of knowledgeable on the whole subject of what you get out of the ritual.
Well, I guess you're going to get out of it what you put into it. I don't think that you're going to get more than what you put out, than what you put into it. I think that I have very strong convictions that the more creative and the more the more clever application of specific types of principles, the use of imagination and of concentration will help the individual objectively be able to reach some of their desired means, the desired goals. I don't think these kind of things happen just arbitrarily. I think that the greatest magicians in history have all been artists and people of creative mind, simply because they live as much in the subjective world as they do in the objective world. A lot of people, you ask them, it's like, what do you like to do in your spare time? People who don't like to read or delve into anything that takes mind to use in a creative field. They're very physically oriented. Usually are much better athletes of one kind or another, but they're not usually very good at creating things because they spend much of their time in the physical world and less of it in the subjective. And I think that your greatest magicians actually are going to come out of the fields of writing and out of art, painting, sculpture, etc. H.P. Lovecraft even talked about this in his story, particularly The Call of Cthulhu. He said that it wasn't amongst the salt of the earth that they were having the dreams about the strange being which had come up out of the ocean and who was seeking to ravage the earth. It came from the creative disciplines that where most of this information was of a very high order, and that people had been most inspired. I think these people who live like that constantly, and that their subjective world is as important as their objective one, who can sit in a chair all day long and be completely entertained because they live in their mind as much as they do in the physical world.
Yes, that would bring you into that type of creative impulse necessary for... Well, basically, we were talking about shifting all the atoms in the universe to conform to your ideal, right? In a way.
No, I would agree. But like I said, I don't believe that comes in a socialistic idea or manner. I don't believe it's just wanting it to happen. I believe there are great disciplines that come from this type of thing, and I think that there's a certain amount of perhaps personal sacrifice that must be initiated in making that kind of thing happen. There's a reason why it's easier to initiate effects in Tibet and in some of these remote places in the world than it is in modern cities, because you're not surrounded by the dross of overstimulation by television or the internet or books or movies, this type of thing. You live very simplistically, and you have to go inward as opposed to outward to gain these answers. And I think that there's definitely a correlation here.
Well, you mentioned the Cthulhu mythos, and I'll tell you that's one that's near and dear to my heart. It really seems like H.P. Lovecraft was trying to bring out the Sumerian mythology and then coupling it with these concepts of the Yog-Sothoth and the fish monsters. This is something that has really intrigued me, and I was surprised to find you so involved in the Cthulhu mythos. What do you think about the whole idea of
I'd be really surprised as to why you wouldn't think that was important. I mean, the Church of Satan was the first organization that actually published rituals oriented around Lovecraftian mythology. Two of them come to mind immediately from the Satanic Rituals book, which was published in 1972 or 73. And that is the Ceremony of the Nine Angles. And the other one is the Call to Cthulhu, because we felt that Lovecraft was the last great mythologist. Here was a man who, because of his upbringing, was very much like an austere monk. He had few friends, but he was so alienated from contemporary society. He had often remarked that he felt that he had been born out of time or had been born much too late. Who lived so strongly within his subjective universe that he became, again, a lightning rod, an attractor for these forces. There are different camps of thought that believe that Lovecraft was simply a writer from New England who was just overtly inspired by ancient mythology. Then There is an entire separate camp of people who believe that Lovecraft was HPL, H.P. Lovecraft, High Priest Lovecraft, who may have, because of the influence of his Masonic father, been in contact with these forces because he had access to books and ephemera left to the young Lovecraft. My position is somewhere in between. I believe that because of the austere life that he left, very much like a monk, and was very lonely and very much the outsider, which is actually the name of one of his stories, set himself up to be quite receptive to these forces, and therefore was able to chronicle them in a way that is very realistic to our present day condition. And even though he may not necessarily have even been aware of it, but it most definitively, he saw the coming of apocalyptic mind frame of modern society, and he capitalized on this. Money wasn't the reason of the capitalization. It was that he was able to write about it. And now we can look at it now, many, many years later, and say, well, he was definitely tapped into this force.
I was sitting in St. Augustine, Florida, with all of its obelisks dedicated to our dead and sitting over the slave market. And just across the way from these obelisks was a spot with a tomb with a large building surrounding it. And on this tomb had a large fish monster caduceus. And I mean, being on the East Coast in the Cthulhu lands, along with the idea of a fish monster caduceus popping up in a tomb, I thought was really amazing in trying to discover the realities of some of Lovecraft's ideas.
Well, I think that this is resurgent atavism. I believe a lot of these things are held within the human mind and that they sprout up, at the most opportune times. And I think you're going to see even more of these type of things happen, before 2012. Consider this, Freeman. Within the last 20 years, we've discovered more and more of these sacred patterns to be found in architecture and in art that for so long were, just hidden because most people were completely unaware of it. A lot of this has changed just as a result of the internet. People are much better educated now, but I think that it takes a special type of mentality to be able to see the correlations between these things. Yourself being one of them, I think. And I believe that the coming society, the coming world view is going to be far more satanic, and I think that we're going to see Christianity and its pallid, incompetent Christ and Christ ideology, ground underfoot. I think it's going to become not only outmoded, but I think it's going to become ostracized. I think that people eventually who believe that they can talk to their god of the sand from the Middle East, will be tantamount to mental illness. I certainly would like to see that happen. I think that the greatest experiments in both science, literature, art, and any of the other disciplines have been retarded because of the influence of this cult of self hatred and deceit, which has been initiated through Christianity. Christianity is your problem. It's not Satanism that's your problem.
I think I agree with that. I definitely step in dangerous grounds, but I'm an equal opportunity offender, and I also am willing to listen to everyone's perspective. I don't mind.
I'm an equal opportunity bigot too. So
yeah, so I'll step on anybody's toes to get to the truth and to understand.
Love doesn't mind stepping on a few toes. Neither does truth. So that's okay.
Absolutely, I'm right there with you. All right, well, we're coming up on the break, and I think we might go to some phone calls. I would like to get to more discussion of your Ragnarok engine and what you plan on doing with it on 2012. So on the other side of this, if you want to phone in, the phone numbers are 3 Network. This is your host, Freeman, and tonight we are talking with Satanist Magister Rex Church. Now, these ideas of Christianity versus Satanism, I'd like to hear some of the listeners' thoughts. If you want to call in, it's 360-350-1486, or out of the U.S., 866-639-1486. And now we're thinking, and Rex, I want to get you to get this started, the concept of self-sacrifice as opposed to liberation through the satanic means. So The Christian paradigm has us limiting our human potential and afraid to express any ideas that might go into what they call sin. And when the Satanists are completely opposed and even adamant about doing the opposite of this, you want to get into this idea?
Well, without exception, unless you are of Hebraic or